exploratory essay. Better Off Dead as a Mobius paradox of identity and continuation. Introduction. The paradox at first glance. At first glance, the fragment titled Better Off Dead appears simple, direct, even flippant. If better off dead, then be dead, and carry on. But inside these 12 words is a looping contradiction, a challenge, and perhaps even a cure. It is structured like a conditional imperative. If X, then Y, but one in which Y is both an end and a beginning. To be better off dead is to imply a condition where death would improve one's situation. But death, classically understood, is a terminal point, not a location one carries on from. So how is one to be dead and carry on? Herein lies the Mobius strip, the paradox where the instruction folds back on itself. It suggests dying as a solution, but not as a conclusion. It proposes death not as annihilation, but as transformation, and perhaps as a kind of false barrier we've misunderstood. The phrase challenges the finality of identity itself. Who or what dies? Who or what carries on? In this essay, we will unpack the layered paradox of this fragment across multiple dimensions: logical structure, psychological survival, spiritual initiation, metaphysical framing, and existential resilience. By the end, we may discover that being dead is not what we thought it was, and that carrying on is not merely continuing, but something far more radical. Second, logical disjunctions and the collapse of binary frames. The phrase begins with a hypothetical, if better off dead. This is not a question, though it sounds like one when spoken aloud. It is a conditional clause that logically begs for completion. What follows is a resolution of the conditional, then be dead, but not in the way most logic chains work. It doesn't affirm the condition and proceed to a new one. Instead, it collapses the binary distinction between life and death. There is no intermediate clause, no choose death, no accept the end. Instead, there's a command: be dead, not become dead, not die, but be. This is crucial. The imperative be indicates identity rather than process. To be dead is not an action. It is a state of being, a mode of selfhood. But then comes the kicker, and carry on. Here we arrive at the disjunction. The command splits the meaning of death from its traditional position as the antithesis of continuation. It suggests a subject that has passed through or dissolved the line and is somehow still mobile, still functional. The phrase is a paradox, not because it is illogical, but because it forces logic into a terrain where logic alone cannot go. This is a spiritual paradox, a psychological one, and a metaphysical one. It invites us into a riddle about transformation, shedding, and the parts of ourselves that persist beyond trauma, despair, identity, and even egoic selfhood. Third, psychological death, the ego and the false self. To be better off dead does not always mean literal death. In psychoanalytic and existential frameworks, this often signals ego collapse, a moment where the false self, the defensive structure, or the socially performative persona no longer serves. In Jungian language, this is the disintegration of the mask, the persona. In trauma psychology, it may refer to the exhaustion of coping mechanisms. In spiritual language, it is the death before death, the internal crucifixion required before awakening. In such moments, one can truly feel that they are better off dead, not because life is inherently worthless, but because the version of the self currently trying to survive is unsustainable. That version is bent, broken, maladaptive. To continue in that form is to extend suffering indefinitely. Here, the line becomes instruction rather than doom. If better off dead, then be dead. Die to the role, die to the identity, die to the expectations. Let it burn, let it fall, let the scaffolding of who you thought you were collapse. This form of death is not terminal, but necessary. And once it has occurred, once you have shed the husk, what comes next? And carry on. The self that carries on is not the same self that died. That's the riddle. It is a reconstituted self, a resurrected self, a clarified self. The voice that speaks this line does not seek annihilation. It seeks refinement through destruction. Fourth, spiritual initiation, descent into the underworld. In many spiritual traditions, especially mystery religions and initiatory frameworks, death is not the end, it is the gateway. Shamans must undergo symbolic death. Mystics descend into the underworld. Christ descends into hell. Osiris is dismembered. Orpheus journeys down. In these initiations, the soul must face obliteration, not to die, but to be remade. The initiate leaves behind the surface world, the consensual reality, the map of things known. The ego panics, the body suffers, and the soul undergoes a terrible unraveling. This is death by another name. The fragment reflects that process precisely. If better off dead, then be dead. This is the call to enter the underworld voluntarily. It is not a suicidal urge. It is a sacred directive. Go down, stop resisting, die in the right way, and carry on, and then come back, re-emerge, not as before, not with all the baggage, but return as one who knows the underworld and lives beyond it. This is the paradox of the twice born. The one who carries on is not untouched, but they are real in a way the pre-death self was not. They are deeper, grounded, transparent to truth. V. Metaphysical possibility. Is death final? Let us for a moment entertain the metaphysical reading at its most literal. What if death is not the end? What if being dead does not mean absence, but presence in another form? Philosophers, from Socrates to Spinoza to Simone Weil, have suggested that our grasp of life and death is based on flawed assumptions. If consciousness is not merely neuronal activity, then death may be a doorway, not an erasure. In that view, the fragment is not paradox, but instruction. If better off dead, then be dead and carry on. Perhaps there are modes of carrying on that are not biological. Perhaps the true self is not tied to this temporary housing. If so, the imperative takes on a new angle, a release from fear. Here we enter a Stoic acceptance, a Buddhist detachment, a Gnostic defiance. If death is not loss, then what is it? If it frees us from delusion, why resist? And more importantly, if death has already happened inside us, then maybe we are already the walking dead, in the best sense, free of illusion, immune to manipulation, unseduced by the world's games. To carry on while dead is to walk clean. Sixth, existential framing, the rebellion of the still standing. In the literature of war, depression, and personal desolation, the dead who walk motif arises frequently. Veterans return from war dead inside. Survivors of grief feel like ghosts. Prisoners of addiction or abuse know what it is to carry on after the world is ended. Here, the fragment becomes both sword and salve. It names a reality and offers a way through. If better off dead, then be dead. Okay, says the voice, let the death in, admit it, stop pretending, and carry on. Not as an act of denial, but defiance. This is rebellion, not against life, but against the demand that one be alive in the traditional sense, to count. To carry on while dead is to reject the terms of false aliveness. It is to say, I will continue, not as you define life, but as I now must. Hollow, maybe, but moving. Burned, maybe, but not erased. It is the anthem of survivors, of ghosts who rebuild themselves, bone by bone. Seventh, structural mirror, Mobius, logic, and identity reboot. Now we return to the Mobius strip, a surface with only one side, a strip of paper twisted and joined. It reveals how what appears to be two is actually one. Walk the strip and you will return to your starting point without ever crossing an edge. The phrase better off dead contains that same turn. If better off dead, then be dead and carry on. At first, it suggests death ends the story, then it reverses. Death starts the next part. The person is still moving, but the self has turned inside out. The death implied is not the conclusion of the journey, but the condition of its continuation. The strip loops. So what has died? The unnecessary part, the false narrative, the crust, the performative self, the inherited trauma, the fear. What remains? The part that can carry on. That is the sacred structure of the phrase. It folds death into life and life into death without hierarchy. It invites us to die correctly, not in despair, but in precision, in freedom. Fate. Final reflection. Who speaks this line? One final question must be asked. Who is the speaker of this phrase? Is it the inner voice of the self, hardened by trials? Is it the wise elder who has already died and returned? Is it God? Is it the void? Perhaps it is none of these, and all of them. The voice is impersonal and intimate. It does not plead. It does not seduce. It states, if better off dead, then be dead and carry on. It offers a strange kind of love, the love of clarity, of sober transition, of radical self-respect. There is no guilt in the line, no shame, only movement. Ninth conclusion, the paradox resolved or absorbed. So, what have we found? This fragment is not a suicide note. It is a resurrection code. It acknowledges the internal deaths we all face, the deaths of meaning, of identity, of hope, and offers not comfort, but a path. Not cheer up, not stay strong, not you matter, but to be dead and carry on, accept the end of what needed to end, and then begin again, not as what was, but as what now is. The paradox holds, and that's the key. It doesn't resolve into simplicity. It absorbs contradiction like a Mobius band, alive on the dead side and dead on the living side. It is a riddle, a koan, a torch. It means don't fake being alive. If something in you has died, let it. But don't stop moving. Don't stop showing up. The you that's left might be the one that was supposed to live all along.